Hello everybody. Yesterday I was lucky enough to sample the rare, the raucous and the rather incredible Jaguar F-Type Project 7. How do you beat a 7? Well, with an 8 of course. At a quick glance, it will be very easy to think that the transformation which has gone on here is much less dramatic than that for the Project 7. However, the opposite is in fact true. Yes, under here there is a Jaguar XE, but the only original body panels which remain are the front doors and the roof. This is in fact, as far as I'm concerned, the most radical car to come from Jaguar since the XJ220, and it's also their most powerful production car ever. You may now be thinking, why an XE? The answer, I think, is probably, why not? After all, the combination of massive engine in small car is one generally guaranteed to produce a few smiles. And this wasn't simply a case of taking an existing model and just turning the wick up a bit. Yes, this 600 horsepower version of the V8 is the most powerful Jaguar ever built. But the more impressive feat was getting the engine in there at all, because no other production XE ever got an 8-cylinder engine. For once though, that engine is overshadowed. In pictures, the Project 8 looks good. In the flesh, it looks mean. That aggressive front end is made up entirely of carbon fiber panels. The track is an inch wider at the front and 3 inches wider at the back. The splitter, the ride height and the rear wing are all manually adjustable, and they work. This makes real downforce, and there are plenty of other motorsports-inspired features too, like the all-aluminium Bilstein dampers, the springs which have little helpers on top of them because the regular items are 4.5 times stiffer than normal. The car is rose-jointed, the wheel bearings are ceramic, and it has the largest discs ever fitted to a Jaguar up until that point, 400mm at the front and 396 at the rear. Speaking of which, if you are following a Project 8, there are two things to be aware of. First, if you're on track, good luck. This, I believe, is still the record holder for 4-door production saloons at the Nürburgring, with a time set of 7 minutes and 18 seconds. That is incredible, and it's quicker than the current darling of the Evo world, the BMW M5 CS. Secondly, if you're on the road, these Cup 2 tyres and the aggressive cutouts here are a recipe for disaster. It has already claimed at least one windscreen, and I'm sure we'll have a few more. Numbers fans, are you ready? 0 to 60, 3.3 seconds. 0 to 100, 7.6. That's fast. Top speed, depending on specification, 200 miles an hour. Weight, though, is less impressive. You would imagine this being all aluminium and carbon fibre and motorsports derived, it would be lightweight. But it's not. 1,725 kilos is the number I seem to keep finding. And I just don't know how Jaguar managed it. The XJ isn't that much heavier. Where have they put it? Like with the Project 7, it's the interior of the Project 8 that is closest to the donor car. In other words, it's an XE in here, with only a few giveaways that this is something a little bit different, like this rather out of place and sort of prototype looking sliver of carbon fibre, the tiny little sill kick here, which very disappointingly sits on a piece of rather cheap plastic, and these seats, which actually are quite nice. The Project 8 was offered in a number of different specifications. The flagship one was the hardcore 2-seater with a scaffold in the back and the big wing. This is the 4-seater alternative, which still gets all the aero, but has comfort seats and rears that you can actually still use. They then also offered a touring version, which had the same interior setup as this, but minus the wing at the back. And that had a lower top speed because they thought it probably wasn't going to be as stable. The interior of the Project 8 I've always found a little bit confusing. The exterior is stunning, a handmade piece of automotive art, but in here they seem to have just given up a little bit. I'm also not sure why they felt the need to fit these seats. Even in 4-seater specification, because this car has 4 doors, you can still have lightweight fixed buckets up here and people can still get into the back. Very strange. Like the Project 7 before it, though a lot of work has gone into this car, the price asked for it I felt was actually quite reasonable. These were £150,000, which yes, is a lot more than any other XE. But that's because it's a lot more than any other XE. Compare it with, say, a 911 GT3 RS, and you'll see it's actually priced just about right, particularly when you consider these are much rarer. Jaguar said they would make no more than 300. And I firmly believe if this car came out today, it would have sold out instantly. As it happened, several years ago when the car was released, they couldn't shift them. And the final number sold is between 200 and 250. What then went wrong? That's not something I'm going to find out in a car park. I do have one theory as to why Jaguar may have struggled to shift these. You might have noticed I am sat on the left-hand side of the car, and that is the only way you could have your Project 8. The Project 7, despite the fact it had bespoke bodywork for left and right-hand drive variants and was made in even fewer numbers, was available in left and right-hand drive. This was not. I have heard many explanations as to why this is the case, and chiefly they revolve around that engine and the packaging up front. The idea is that because it was stuffed so far back, pressed into the bulkhead, which needed to be modified, they simply couldn't make it in right-hand drive. I'm not sure I entirely buy that story. I accept that I am not a Jaguar engineer, and perhaps there was an excellent reason as to why right-hand drive was simply an impossibility. But I think it was just complacency. I reckon Jaguar looked at this and went, yeah, 300 of those, I reckon we could just build them in left-hand drive and we'll shift them, no worries at all. If they wanted to make more, they probably would have had to give customers the choice, but I reckon they thought, nah, it's fine, we'll sell them either way. The reason I say it's complacency, not being a Jaguar engineer, is because, though it's true the XE was never sold with the V8 in, it was at one point sold with the V6. And the V6 of this generation was the really lazy one that Jaguar had, which was essentially the bottom end of a V8 with V6 heads on top. In other words, there was always enough room in that engine bay for an 8. To me, the decision not to offer this car in right-hand drive is simply a baffling one, particularly when it's a Jag. Surely one of your biggest markets was always going to be your home one. Here. Even stuff like that, getting past somebody that's had to pull over on the side of the road. Because I'm on the wrong side of the car, that's much trickier than it should be. You may be about to notice in some of the drive-bys that David has had to position his car quite a bit further over than you might normally expect. I always get a lot of flack for the driving of others in my videos, but in this case it seems worth mentioning. At all times he had the visibility he needed, and by positioning himself further into the road, you make things just that little bit better. You can see further ahead. If you don't believe me, just ask anybody who's been on an advanced driving course, particularly one led by a police driving instructor. They are all told to drive in a manner that allows them to see further down the road. If you can see and be seen, there really isn't much danger. One thing about this car is really impressing me. In the video on the Project 7, I remarked upon the fact that despite it being a sort of more hardcore, sporty version, on the road it was still quite pleasant. This looks like it's dialed things up to 11, but from in here, it doesn't necessarily feel it. Yes, it's very firm. Any car with spring rates like this and rose jointing is always going to be that way. But I wouldn't say it's any worse than the current 911 GT3. If anything, it could be a little bit more compliant. The dampers are actually adaptive. In a car like this, I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect them to be simply manually adjustable. If you want to move them up and down, you do have to get out a set of spanners, and Mr. Metcalf of Harry's Garage did an excellent video showing you all of the different things you need to do in order to set this car up for the track. At the moment, the front splitter is extended by about a third of the way. The full setup apparently is just a bit too much for street driving. Ordinarily, in any review, I go through the motions of starting in comfort mode, then moving up to dynamic, giving track a bit of a go before deciding it's too much, and then generally settling somewhere in the middle. Given the fact this is a glorious 600 horsepower Jaguar and it's a bright sunny day, will you forgive me if I skip some of the formalities and just whack it straight into track and give it the big un? I enjoyed the Project 7 greatly. I'm in love with the Project 8. Now that little stretch there I did in the full factory track mode, but there is an option for setting some of your own preferences. I'm going to leave everything, engine, steering, gearbox in track, bar the suspension. The only other option we've got for that is dynamic. It's still very firm, it's still a little bit bouncy on more difficult sections, but it is mesmerizing. The turn-in is superb. It's not ultra quick, it's not Italian, it's not like a Giulia Quadrifoglio or anything like that. The gearbox, though, is sensational. I think that's one of the reasons people look down upon this car. I've known so many dedicated petrol heads that think a DCT is always going to be better than an automatic. Perhaps once upon a time there was some truth to that, but now, not a bit of it. I suppose a really good dual clutch is just a little bit sharper than this, but I have very, very few complaints about this gearbox in manual and track mode. David actually said I should really try it in auto as well, because it is apparently hilarious fun. Yeah, it just wants to leave the car in gear more or less as long as it can. Oh, this thing's stupid fast. I mean, really, really savagely quick, but trustworthy. One key difference between this and the Project 7 is that that was only rear-wheel drive, but this retains Jaguar's all-wheel drive system. You do still need to be careful when you enter a bend because it is a heavy car, but I have a lot of faith in this, particularly on corner exit. It's magic. I mean, proper magic, this. I wish the steering had a little bit more feel. It responds to your inputs brilliantly, no complaints whatsoever, but it doesn't feed back to you. The weighting is nice enough, but it doesn't move in the hand, doesn't writhe around. It is, on that front, a little bit disappointing. Given the huge rear tyres, the fact the car sits quite low, and those rather aggressive cutouts at the back, the sound of stones pinging off bodywork is one you're going to need to get very familiar with. Now, this is the nightmare scenario, trying to reverse around, and actually you can see out of this. It's got a reversing camera, which I'm very grateful for, and I like that with this car they haven't chucked all the creature comforts in the bin. So you've still got air conditioning, you've still got electric windows, the seats frustratingly are electric, and that is something I think they don't need. You've also got your Meridian surround stereo system. It won't be very good, but only because the surround stereo system in other cars isn't. But it's okay, it's there, it works, it's something. If you were that way inclined, you could definitely daily drive one of these. but the left-hand drive thing really does get in the way. Right here, right now, it's not really detracting from my enjoyment of the car, and I do hope said enjoyment is coming through loud and clear, because I am loving the Project 8. That's terrifying. Lorry coming past, tight bend, oh, do not enjoy. But here, open road, that I know, I do. Give it the big one, and the noise is sensational. I think it might be a touch quieter than the Project 7. In fairness, I think most of the difference is the fact that in this car, you have a roof. For the drive-bys, this was perhaps just a little less raucous, but the cracks and pops in both were ear-shattering. You've got this mix of supercharger whine, angry V8, and general road noise that is fantastic. It would have to be a very cold and dour individual that doesn't get a kick out of this. David and I spent quite a bit of time talking about the future values of these cars, and I realised that, you know, I don't know whether in 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 years this car is going to be worth the same as it is now, twice as much as it is now, 5 times as much as it is now, or half as much. And here's the thing. If this car, for example, in 5 years is simply unsellable, nobody wants it, you'll be lucky to get 70 grand for it. Well, if you sat around not driving it because you wanted it to go up in money, you're gonna feel like a bit of a plum because you've had this lovely thing you failed to enjoy. Likewise, if the car in a few years is worth £500,000 and you're terrified to drive it because it's worth too much, you'll feel like a bit of a plum because you didn't enjoy it when it wasn't worth stratospheric money. What are you going to pay for one of these now? Well, as it happens, you're going to pay not that much less than when they were new. And that, like in the Project 7, is remarkable because we're currently sat in a car market that is going very, very strange places. There are a couple of these cars, I believe, coming up to auction soon, and I'm going to be keeping a keen eye on the results for both. One of them is coming to Silverstone, an auction that may have happened by the time this video comes out. I am certain that Mr. Metcalf will have made mention of it if he does a walk-around preview. That car is quite interesting as it's one designed for a race series with these cars that never really took off. It's guided at only around £100,000, but looks to me like it could be quite a good buy. There is another coming up for sale, though I can't remember where, and Premier GT currently have one of these in a very nice bespoke green that looks sensational at about 155 grand, so probably similar to the original asking price. That car only has 100 miles on it, so I expect they're trying to aim at the collector market. Whether they'll really get that money or not, I couldn't say. This particular car only has 2,666 miles on it. That's worrying. But I am glad to say that David, the owner, really does enjoy it. And he is a Jag man. He also has the Project 7 I drove yesterday. He's got another F-Type with a remap taking it to silly power. And his daily driver is an XFS Sport Brake. Coming to the junction there, the carbon ceramic brakes were just a little bit worrying because it didn't feel like they actually wanted to stop the car. Reminded me for a moment of the Alfa Giulia with its brake-by-wire system that is quite difficult to modulate at low speeds. When I've been out and about and having fun, I haven't really given them much of a second thought. They seem to do the job just fine. I know it's also a really silly thing to mention, but let's be honest here, we are all this way inclined. When this car was following me earlier, I noticed that the indicators at the front still have normal bulbs in them. They do that business. Considering this is based on the XE, Jaguar's most youthful car, I would have just thought those would be LEDs. I know it's silly, I know it's strange, I know ultimately it doesn't make a blind bit of difference, but it was something that I noticed. Around town, the gearbox is actually quite nice and smooth, even though it's in track mode. It's very easy, very predictable. The car has so much pull anyway, like all the others I've driven. If you get the gear completely wrong, it honestly doesn't matter. It is sad to think, but I honestly believe it is true. Had Jaguar released this car today, they would have sold out instantly. That perhaps is as much a function of the market as anything else, but when it was launched, I don't think people really knew what to make of it. I suppose many thought that it was just too hardcore, too track orientated, and just unusable on the road, when in fact, that's where it's an absolute riot. I would probably be more wary about using it on track, simply because of the weight of the thing. 1 3/4 tons is a lot for a track car. Ooh. In fact, allow me an indulgence. This is one of the better things about being left-hand drive. You're closer to the wall. It's dirty, the noise out of this thing. Dirty. Obviously, because this is based on the regular XC, the interior space is the same. It's okay. You can get 4 adults in it, and that's one of the reasons David bought this car. With the Project 7, he has to decide who in the family he's going to take to events. With this, everyone can come along. Apparently, the full-up 2-seater cage in the back specification wasn't anywhere near as popular as this. The Touring, I don't think they sold very many of. That's the one without the rear wing, and that, I believe, was a sort of last-ditch attempt to try and convince a few more people to buy one. I remember when these cars were sort of coming to the end of their production run, and it was very, very sad to see Jaguar struggling to move them on, but I just don't think they ever gave them the marketing that they deserved, and the audience, to be honest, for them just kept buying M3s, GT3s and everything else. This is the really weird thing. An M3 GTS, by comparison, has not very much that they've actually changed, but now commands a significant premium, and when new, the price of those didn't make much sense at all. Anyway, we appear to have another stretch of very enjoyable empty road. Let's give this one last go. The thump in the back at low RPM definitely seems to be less than that in the Project 7. Perhaps that's a placebo. The open roof, the lighter weight, all that could add up. The rear wheel drive as well, you need to pay attention to. This seems a lot smoother, a lot more progressive. David says this is something he's noticed as well. In fact, all of the 3 cars he has with the 5-litre V8 have very different characteristics. Certainly no complaints about the speed this thing can carry though. Oh, and the gearbox, listen to that. I would actually like a quicker steering rack. That corner in particular, and this one, I'm turning the wheel more than I would like. Whoa! Ah! Oh! When I drove the Project 7, I thought I could feel a point where I felt like the car was beginning to struggle to overcome the aerodynamics a little bit. Not like it gave up and just hit a brick wall. It's still a 575 horsepower car. This one I don't seem to have found that point, and I think on the road I'm never going to. It's intoxicating, purely and simply intoxicating, this car. Why couldn't you make it right-hand drive, Jag? Why? The all-wheel drive system even works really well. I haven't noticed its presence. Yes, it's there. Yes, I'm sure it's been shuffling the power about. On a day like today, if it was rear-wheel drive with these tyres, would I notice so much? Probably not. But with a car like this, to have the safety net of the system, I don't mind that it's there. I don't think you're going to get this car at Bedford Autodrome, you know. Don't think that's happening. I shall now, and I did earlier, by the way, off camera, put it into comfort mode, and it doesn't actually seem to make that much of a difference. Yes, the suspension is a little bit backed off, but I think it's basically the same as it is in dynamic. It's between track and dynamic in this car that the big changes occur. And to be honest, when it's something like this, seriously, just set it in track I with the suspension in dynamic, you're done. Finished, finito, and you're gonna have the time of your life. Honestly, I don't care that it's 150 grand. If this steering wheel was over there, I probably would have already bought it. I'd have been on the phone to Silverstone, put my money down, gimme, I wants one. But I can't help shake the feeling that in this configuration, one day, it's going to cause a problem. And that might be why this car has less than 3,000 miles on it. Maybe I'm wrong. You tell me. I know Harry will disagree. In any case, this is a special car, and if a Jaguar does deserve to be worth double its asking price, it's this one. The 7 was good. This is a real great. A huge thank you to David for bringing his car out. To you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe, tap the bell notification, because there will always be more JayEmm content here at JayEmm on Cars. See you soon. Bye-bye.